is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. An opportunity for women to share highs, lows, gripes and groans in an irreverent televisual Tupperware party. Keeping me company today is Molly Kingsley from the children's charity Us for Them. And here's what we've got coming up on the show. If Downing Street staff did break the lockdown rules, it begs the question, why? Is this down to a toxic culture of arrogance and entitlement inside Number 10? Not a baby boom, but more a baby bust. We'll discuss what's behind Britain's plummeting birth rate. And would you have your face injected with fillers by Katie Price? The former glamour model is training to start wielding needles, making us ask whether we need to get serious about who can administer cosmetic procedures. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But what do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for the headlines. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB News newsroom. Let's get you up to date. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, has accused Boris Johnson of hiding behind the civil service investigation into Downing Street parties. Well, it follows her urgent question in the Commons over claims that 100 staff were invited to bring your own booze to a gathering during the first lockdown. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis has told MPs the inquiry into allegations of lockdown parties could be paused if the Metropolitan Police decide to investigate. Well, the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, says the Prime Minister's absence from the Commons was telling.
It is incredibly disappointing, but not unsurprising, that the Prime Minister, of whom I asked this question, is not here today, despite not having any official engagements. And I think, Mr. Speaker, his absence speaks volumes, as does his smirks on the media. The public have already drawn their own conclusions. He can run, but he can't hide.
Government ministers are putting pressure on scientists to allow the UK to follow in the footsteps of the US and cut the COVID isolation period from a minimum of 7 days to 5. In America, it starts at the onset of symptoms or the day of a positive test, whichever is sooner. Well, meanwhile, from today, asymptomatic people who test positive for COVID-19 on a lateral flow test in England, well, they'll no longer need to take a follow-up PCR test. They will still, of course, be required to self-isolate immediately. The aim is to free up testing capacity for those with symptoms. Now, armed police have cordoned off a house in Coventry over concerns for the welfare of a man and his 8-year-old son. Well, we can go live now to the scene. Our Midlands reporter Balvinder Sidhu is there for us. Balvinder, good afternoon. Just tell us, what is the latest?
Well, I can tell you that it's been more than 60 hours now since specialist police officers have been trying to negotiate with the man and his son who are trapped inside a house. They are not willing to come out and they're not letting the police in. Meanwhile, a large section of this area behind me has been cordoned off to locals, and people who live near the property have not been allowed to leave. They're trapped inside and they can't leave without a police escort. The school, which is next to me, is closed and has been closed for 2 days now.
Balvinder, thank you. Now, tennis's governing body says the controversy over Novak Djokovic's Australian visa application has been damaging on all fronts. In a statement, the ATP says it welcomes the court's decision to quash his visa cancellation, but urged players to get vaccinated to comply with global travel regulations. Djokovic is now training ahead of the Australian Open. Russia has insisted it has no intention of invading Ukraine, despite amassing 100,000 troops at the border. Russian and US officials have been holding talks in Geneva to try and de-escalate tensions, but there's no sign of progress. Well, security expert Will Geddes told us at GB News there's concern on both sides.
100,000 is, I think, more of a demonstration of resilience and being robust, because there's this huge concern about NATO imposing into Ukraine the capabilities to potentially launch missiles into Russia, and equally, NATO's worried about Russia getting into Ukraine.
Doctors in the US have transplanted a pig heart into a human patient for the first time. The experimental surgery took 7 hours to complete in the University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore, with medical experts saying it saved 57-year-old David Bennett's life. Surgeons say he's doing well 3 days after the procedure. It's estimated over 100,000 Americans are currently waiting for an organ transplant. Now, a set of 12 new stamps are going to be launched later this month to celebrate the Rolling Stones as the band marks its 60th anniversary. The stamps will feature images from some of their most famous performances over the years. It includes their 1969 London Hyde Park show, held just 2 days after the death of founding member Brian Jones. Well, the Rolling Stones worked closely with Royal Mail to develop the set. They're only the 4th music group to feature in a dedicated set of stamps. You are up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, let's go back to We Need to Talk About with Alex. The very first Partygate scandal was one thing. It revealed the Prime Minister to be a lightweight and a hypocrite. It's not as though we didn't know Bojo the bon vivant had a predilection for the finer things and fibbing. But this latest revelation is in a whole new stratosphere. Because cast your minds back to lockdown 1.0, when hindsight wasn't a wonderful thing, when most of the population were genuinely petrified, following every ghastly diktat from the PM behind his Hazard strip lectern, gravely commanding to stay at home to save lives like some dystopian Hollywood drama. Dog walkers were chased by drones. £1,000 fines were doled out without recourse or appeal. This was the land before vaccines, before lateral flows and PCRs, before variants and Plan Bs. People were genuinely frightened, having been told categorically that disobedience could mean death. So we're left with quite a conundrum. Either Downing Street never believed their own hype and set about terrorising the nation, waging war against their own people, or they did believe COVID to be such a major threat to life, it necessitated the most stringent, unprecedented measures where a boozy bash could literally kill people. I'm not sure which conclusion I'd rather draw. Reckless liars destroying lives and livelihoods, or feckless and flippant gamblers in the face of death. Now ask yourself whether this is the man you want in charge of a nuclear weapon. The party's over, Boris. It's time to pack your bags and leave. Well, that's my view. But not everyone is as scathing. Here's what Conservative MP Michael Fabricant had to say earlier on GB News.
And what was he trying to do? Saying, look, guys, you've all worked together in a very difficult situation. in a situation where you could have all caught COVID together, as he did at number 10 Downing Street and almost lost his life. It's a lovely sunny day, let's have a break. Now, it may have broken the rules, it may not, we'll find out. But you know what? The motives were the right motives, and it was a controlled environment with no outsiders coming in.
Well, there we are. Apparently, if you didn't go and see family members and follow the rules during the pandemic, you were being disloyal to them. Now, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by Molly Kingsley, who's a co-founder of Us For Them, which is a charity that promotes the interest of children. OK, what's your position on these Downing Street parties? Are you just exhausted by it all that you don't care anymore? Is this one really, you know...
I mean, I think the whole lot. I think it goes to... It's an authority issue and a trust issue. And I think we have to remember, as you said, Alex, this is during the first lockdown. So during that lockdown, 94% of the most vulnerable kids were not in school. And we know now what some of the really tragic consequences of that were. So obviously we had the case like Arthur Libby, Joe Hughes, we have baby Star. We know the impacts. We know we had women who lost their jobs because they couldn't juggle homeschooling and, you know, what they were meant to be doing from a work point of view. And we had playgrounds taped up, playgrounds for 2-year-olds. And this was going on. And it's unforgivable. And I think, as you say, it's become harder and harder to read a benign explanation into this. Maybe once was okay. But what I've lost track now of the number of parties this is. Well, you know, are we in double figures yet?
More parties than Ibiza, it seems. I mean, we should all be going on holiday to the Downing Street Rose Garden at this rate. Well, let's find out what a few other people out there think on this. Joining me now on the show to continue the discussion about Downing Street is columnist and Conservative commentator Samantha Smith, as well as Conservative and political commentator Joanne Nadler. Joanne, I'm going to start with you. What's your read on this? Have we all got fatigue from all the various Boris bashes and we're just Boris bashing? Or is this just beyond the pale?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Alex. I mean, your intro summed it up, really. This was before we had any sense that the vaccine was on the way, and people were really, really scared. And their lives were hugely restricted. And I think, to a certain extent, what's happened over the last couple of weeks with the vastly, what seems to be an improved situation with Omicron, which seems to have been reasonably well handled by the Prime Minister, had taken the sting out of some of the stories that we were hearing before Christmas. But this has put the government right back into a crisis, I think, of how to justify what makes those parties that we were so upset about before Christmas pale into insignificance.
Yeah, I'm going to now come to you, Samantha. I mean, what is behind this behaviour? Is it flippancy? Are they just, you know, a little bit fickle and change their minds? Or is there some sort of culture of toxic arrogance in number 10 that we're just not really talking about?
It all comes down, Alex, to the Westminster bubble. The assumption that the rules that the rest of the public must live by aren't applicable inside the grounds of 10 Downing Street. If we think back, like the other guests were saying, to that period of time in May 2020, April 2020, this was the same time period when Matt Hancock was warning people to stay at home so they don't kill their grannies. I spent my 18th birthday on the phone to Childline, sobbing my eyes out, just so I wouldn't have to ring in adulthood alone, because I didn't have anyone else in my household. I was living in supported accommodation, and I quite literally turned to a child support service because I was so scared of going out and putting others at risk. And yet our government officials, those people who are supposed to be leading the way and setting the example for how the public should behave, were blatantly disregarding the regulations by having boozy get-togethers because they've worked so hard during this difficult time. Everybody made sacrifices, and Michael Fabricant's excuse of the motives were all good and well, everyone else who had good motives has been prosecuted for the crime of disregarding COVID regulations. So it's absolutely not acceptable to use that as an excuse. No matter the motivations, the law was the law.
Joanne, I'm going to go back to you because, you know, every time people seem to criticise the Prime Minister, and it's a flagrant abuse of power at this point, we always get a load of emails and comments on Twitter accusing the media of, oh, here they go again, they're Boris bashing. But do you think he can survive it this time round?
Well, I mean, if he does, he's going to pull off some astonishing escapology act. He'll be the sort of Harry Houdini of the Conservative Party. I don't think he's imminently going to go, but this seems to me to be one of the most damaging accusations that has been laid at his door. And it would suggest, as you say, that the whole culture of Downing Street has been, at the very best, extremely casual and cavalier. And at worst, as you say, incredibly arrogant. And this seems to place him right at the centre of that culture. It's very difficult to see because he hasn't denied that he attended this event. I appreciate that Michael Fabricant was trying to be charitable, let's say, in his interpretation, and perhaps say that, you know, this was an extremely exhausted team, that the leaders of that team were trying to sort of G people up and give them something to look forward to. But, you know, there were very many people around the country who were extremely exhausted and who didn't have anything to look forward to and who actually were stuck on their own and, you know, as we've heard from Molly, have had very serious consequences. And they will be looking at this and they will be frankly disgusted, as they should be.
Yeah, and Samantha, do you think he can and should survive this? Because it's not just about whether we, the British public, can now trust our Prime Minister, but this must be doing untold damage on his reputation on the world stage as well. So if he's going into bat for our country, whether it's trade negotiations, geopolitical dialogues, everyone's going to think this man can't be trusted. Can he go on?
I think there's a massive lack of faith in our own leader within the party. I'm a Conservative Party member. I've been a member since I was 15 years old, and I've never gotten quite as close to ripping up my Conservative membership as I did over the whole lockdown regulations breach. On the global stage, we've obviously lambasted Jacinda Ardern, Justin Trudeau for their seemingly, you know, endless restrictions and their desire to put absolute control over their citizens. But with Boris, he's done practically the same thing with these stringent lockdown measures. At times, many people would argue overreaching the public health need, but at the same time, he and his aides, at the very least, you know, as it's been said, he hasn't confirmed or denied whether he's attended these parties, but at the very least, the team around him who are making these government policies, who are advising our Prime Minister, have been flagrantly disregarding the very regulations that they've been setting in place for the public to follow. So it makes a mockery of our democracy and of the validity of any sort of regulations or restrictions this government may try to impose.
Yeah, and going back to you, Joanne, I mean, people might be looking at this in retrospect. We're all getting a bit fatigued now about what the latest peccadillo or scandal is emanating from Downing Street, whether it's holidays to Mustique, wallpaper, you know, various cheese and wine sessions. But if, for instance, that gathering had actually led to people contracting COVID and someone had died from it, we would be in a situation where the Prime Minister himself would potentially be responsible for someone's loss of life. I mean, how much more serious can we get before Boris does the right thing and says, I've let you down and I don't think I deserve to be in this role anymore?
Well, I think it's interesting that you end on that point, because I do think he's actually made the situation, as bad as it is, even worse for himself by not coming clean earlier on when the stories of these parties started to drip out. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this party at this time and the scale of it puts the rest of them into the shade, as I said earlier. But nevertheless, I think the edge about the sort of political damage that's being caused to him would have been taken off if they'd been a little bit more upfront about all of this sooner. And once again, what we're seeing now is something that seems to be just extremely evasive from the Prime Minister and from the rest of his team, with this constant reference to the fact that they're not going to talk about this for another 2 weeks, which I think is when Sue Gray, the senior civil servant that's been appointed to look into this, is expected to report. I mean, that's a very sort of dangerous strategy, I think, by the Prime Minister as well, because the next 2 weeks are now, I would imagine, going to be full of even more of these sorts of stories. It's very, very difficult to see how they can navigate 2 weeks without this getting worse, frankly.
Yeah, Joanne, Samantha, thank you so much for your contribution to this debate. It's been a pleasure having you on. I'm going to come back to you, Molly, because, you know, listening to what they say, it sounds like we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and, you know, beggars belief who would look at this and think, well, that's just fine. But there are people out there, aren't there, who say, well, if we get rid of Boris Johnson, who are we going to have instead? It might be someone far more draconian. Do you think it's tenable he can carry on as Prime Minister? Should we give a bit of leeway and say this was an unprecedented crisis and he was doing the best he could? Or do you think this is it? It's time up?
No, I mean, I think there comes a point at which a leader does so much damage to his party that it becomes untenable. And, you know, we are singing from the same hymn sheet, and I think that's for a reason, that it is unforgivable. You know, unless there's something we don't know and we find out, and maybe that, you know, will happen. It looks unlikely. But actually, it is unforgivable. And I think, you know, I feel really quite a lot of sympathy, actually, for his own politicians, because, of course, he's letting all of us down, but he's letting them down too. And, you know, there will be many, many voters, as Samantha says, who would naturally have voted Conservative and will just feel, you know, he's unelectable.
Yeah, no, well, I couldn't agree more. Well, what's your view? Do you agree? Email gbnews@gbnews.uk. I know I'm going to get some of you saying, here you go, you're Boris bashing, but give me your reasons. If you think I am and you think it was fine to have this party during lockdown, explain to me why. You can also, of course, tweet me at GBNews. Now, you're with GB News on TV and, of course, DAB radio, and it's time for a short break and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello again. A bright day with some sunshine across northern parts of the country. Cloudier skies in the south, grey and drizzly for southern parts of England and South Wales. Because of this weather front clearing, it's a weak feature, but it is bringing a lot of low, misty cloud. Once it clears, sunshine is to the north of it, and high pressure builds in for the rest of the week across southern parts of the country. But a keen breeze will be felt across northern Scotland, along with a few showers for the north and northwest. Meanwhile, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, much of North Wales seeing long spells of sunshine. But further south again, that's where we've got the extensive low cloud, some drizzle, perhaps even some moderate bursts of rain for East Anglia and the southeast. 11 or 12 in the south, much colder further north, although feeling more pleasant, I suspect, with those sunny skies. Now, we're going to keep the keen breeze across Scotland overnight, as well as Northern Ireland. That will push in some extra cloud. Northern England seeing that cloud as well, but the cloud in the south clears, and as that clears and winds drop out, well, we'll see an extensive frost and temperatures as low as -4 or -5 Celsius in sheltered spots. Also, some fog patches, mainly around river valleys, sheltered rural parts, and they'll fairly quickly lift, I think, during the morning. Then plenty of sunshine for the southern half of the UK, a marked contrast compared to today. But cloudier skies for parts of northern England, especially the northwest, Northern Ireland and much of Scotland, along with that keen breeze. It's going to be milder actually in the north, but a bit colder further south, with temperatures closer to average here. But again, with light winds, plenty of sunshine, feeling very pleasant indeed. And that's the way things continue for the rest of the week, actually. The southern half of the UK will see sunny spells by day, but increasingly fog forming overnight, and that fog will be dense at times, perhaps continuing through the day on Friday and Saturday in places. Across Scotland and Northern Ireland, breezier and milder.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Alex Phillips on GB News. Now, it's time for the section of the show where we doff our fascinators to the imagined matriarchy as we go about building our very own Womanifesto. That means all of my guests get to nominate 3 policies they think would make the world a better place. And of course, as High Empress of the show, I'll decide if they make the cut. Well, my special guest in the ladies' locker room today is Molly Kingsley, and she is in charge. So what would you change?
Well, I think the first thing I would change is the parental leave system, and alongside that, early years, access for affordable and flexible childcare for everyone, not just women, actually, for parents. But I think those 2 things combined would change life for families in the UK. It would be so much better for children, and it would also solve the gender pay gap. So personally, I don't understand why we're still talking about it and it hasn't been done as it has been in many Nordic countries.
It's not like we didn't know from time immemorial that, birth is part of life, and without it there would be no more human race. And yet, it still seems to me that we're in a situation in the 21st century where women are delaying having children because they don't know how to balance it all. It's shocking.
Well, I think that's right, and the stats speak for themselves. So we know we've got a declining birth rate, and actually it's really looking quite dramatic now. And I think you have to ask yourself why. And, as we were talking just before, it's not a friendly environment, I think, this country now to have children. The infrastructure does not support families. It does not support parents in many, many different ways.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's something I bang on about a lot in my own private circle. So absolutely, big tick, top of the Womanifesto. We love it. OK, delights me with your second policy.
Well, I think alongside that, for that to happen, you have to look at, the policymakers and, how many women are in Parliament, what kind of women are in Parliament. And actually, I think one of the things we've seen for the last 2 years now coming on to is obviously, I come at it from a children's point of view, but we've seen children being very deprioritised in policy making. And our view on that is that because there's a dearth of real, involved working parents within Parliament. So about 1 in 3 women, 1 in 3 politicians overall are women. That's higher in the Labour Party than in the Conservative Party. But I think it's fair to say when you look at the policies and, what's happened particularly during COVID, that children and parents have not been adequately represented at the highest levels. And that is something that, personally and also as a campaigner, I would love to see changed.
Yeah, I mean, look, I couldn't agree more. As we imagine our potential matriarchy, it's so important, of course, to make sure that there are more female legislatures. But how would you put that into practice? Because I personally do not agree with things like all-female shortlists, because I still think the process should be a meritocracy.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think, you only have to look, I think, at what that lifestyle is like to understand how incompatible it would be with small children. So, like my kids are 5 and 8, and if I ever think about going to politics, you just think you couldn't make it work because actually you'd be in London for half your week. And there's many parents, and I'm sure actually, I assume this applies actually as much to men as it does to women. But as a parent, that's really, really tough. You're leaving your children, somewhere else with someone else. And some mothers, some fathers are lucky enough to have someone at home, but many, many don't. And there's also a cost thing here as well. And I think this is where, we get into the affordable, flexible childcare. And I think what we don't have in this country compared to other countries is, well, first of all, affordable childcare, but also flexible. So things like wraparound care are absolutely crucial to working parents. And, you know, you just, as you probably know, you can't do a full works day in school hours between 9 and 3. So I think it's reforming the infrastructure, really, that goes with parenthood to mean that you can do these really quite full-on jobs and have children. It shouldn't be incompatible, but it is at the moment.
Yeah, it's still a case of either or. We love it. I'm glad to hear you raising that. Your third policy? Let's see if you can get 3 out of 3. All my guests have so far. I've never disagreed with anything.
Well, I think the third one, I mean, it's all linked, isn't it? But I think the third one is the reform of the parental leave. So they are all linked. But I think, to my mind, you know, we have this system now where in practice, women take the vast majority of maternity leave. In theory, we have shared parental leave, but that's only open to 3 in 7 families. And of that, only 1% have actually shared it. So the shared parental leave system is broken. We could look to the Nordic countries where what they do is a bit controversial, or it sounds controversial, but they actually effectively force the fathers to take the leave. So you have a kind of snooze it or lose it quota. So you get a certain amount of months. It varies between countries, but Finland is a great example of this, where if dad doesn't take his allocation of leave, it just goes. It's not like you can just shunt it on to the mum. And actually, that works tremendously well to get both parents involved in the child's life. And of course, it also means that for mum, you get her back into the workforce. And that has so many benefits, not only for the mother, but for everything, for the gender pay gap, for releasing the economic potential of women.
No, I love it. It's a great policy. And actually, it's interesting you mentioned Finland, because you just look at their cabinet, and that pretty much is a matriarchy.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So, maybe that's why they get some of these things right. Yeah. Great policies. Now, of course, if you have any views on those policies, email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We love to hear from you. For loads of women, getting cosmetic procedures like Botox or lip fillers is now as normal as the monthly wax, while social media is creating selfie dysphoria, seeing increasing numbers of young girls flocking to the aesthetician. Well, one person who knows all about that is glamour model Katie Price. She was just 18 when she first went under the knife. Now she's training to learn how to give Botox and fillers to others. But surely injecting stuff into someone's face probably shouldn't be administered by someone who doesn't seem to have a plastic surgery stop button and plants her car upside down in a bush after a drugs and booze binge. Well, I'm joined now by consultant ophthalmic and oculoplastic surgeon Elizabeth Hawkes, who professionally practices advanced facial aesthetics. Fantastic to have you on, Elizabeth. Now, I understand that, you know, you can train to administer Botox, but you need a medical practitioner with you. But with fillers, anyone can take a course and do it. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So you're absolutely correct. In the UK, anyone can administer dermal filler. So it's not illegal. You don't need a medical degree or a qualification. Anyone can go and purchase the fillers over the counter. Botox, however, is classified as a medical drug. And so for that reason, you can only access it if you have a medical license. So if you're a doctor, surgeon, dentist, nurse with prescribing rights, or even a pharmacist.
I mean, I can see there are potentially dangers if anybody who, you know, isn't necessarily trained in medicine or aesthetics starts doling out fillers and the like, especially because you might end up looking like the lion from the Wizard of Oz. But are some of these procedures actually dangerous? Could you inflict serious and lasting damage on someone if you get this wrong?
Yeah, you can. So it's absolutely terrifying from my perspective. So my background is I'm a surgeon and I operate in the face. I'm an eyelid plastic surgeon. So I have a very strong, knowledge on anatomy. However, it's terrifying that people who think they have lots of filler and Botox and your injector makes it look easy would then go on to learn it because, the sort of one end of the spectrum of risks are infection, bruising and discomfort. But then at the other end of the spectrum, by occluding a blood vessel, and probably the most severe end of the spectrum is actually blindness. And if this complication isn't firstly recognised early and treated promptly, it can be irreversible. So it's terrifying to think that anyone can just do this by watching a video. And actually, during some of the pandemics, when aesthetic treatments were not being offered by practitioners as it wasn't a priority, there was a real spike in non-medical professionals actually watching a video on YouTube and then injecting themselves at home. And we did see a surge of complications. And in my practice, there was a high rate of patients coming to have filler dissolved.
Wow, so, I was actually going to ask you, have you ever had to patch up other people's botched jobs?
Well, I definitely have. I mean, there's a lot of excellent injectors out there, from surgeons, doctors, nurse practitioners, dentists, like I said, and most of us have a medical qualification, have done a course and are registered with some society. So that's a good way you can do your investigation when choosing a practitioner. But absolutely, a big part of my practice, is particularly as I specialise in the eye area, is botched filler, as it were. So filler is essentially a gel, and it's made of hyaluronic acid, which is a naturally occurring substance that's in our skin. But how filler works is it's chemically manipulated in order to add volume and last longer. So you have to know exactly where you're injecting it, and injecting the right type of filler for the right place. So very commonly, patients would either say they have lumps where they shouldn't be, which need to be dissolved, or botched jobs. For example, if someone has had filler and lost sort of a sense of, what's a natural looking appearance of the face, and they want to perhaps reverse some of the filler that they've had in their lips or in their cheeks or somewhere on the body.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on and warning us all of the dangers of potentially getting things injected in your face by people who might not 100% know what they're doing. You're with GB News on TV and, of course, DAB Radio. Now, after the break, it's time for my guests to have their say. We're going to be hearing what else Molly Kingsley needs to talk about. But first, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 2:34. Let's get you up to date here on GB News with me, Rosie Wright. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party has accused Boris Johnson of hiding behind the civil service investigation into Downing Street parties. Here follows her urgent question in the Commons over claims that 100 staff were invited to bring your own booze to a gathering during the first lockdown. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis has told MPs the inquiry into allegations of lockdown parties could be paused if the Metropolitan Police decide to investigate. Number 10 said it wouldn't be commenting during the current inquiry. Scotland's First Minister is currently giving a COVID update to MSPs in Holyrood. Nicola Sturgeon says that from next week they'll begin to lift restrictions in a phased manner. It's expected she'll also lift restrictions on outdoor large events in Scotland. We'll bring the latest as she reveals it. Now, asymptomatic people who test positive for COVID-19 in England on a lateral flow test no longer need a follow-up PCR from today. They will, of course, still be required to self-isolate immediately. The aim is to free up testing capacity for those with symptoms. Now, doctors in the US have transplanted a pig heart into a human patient for the first time. The experimental surgery took 7 hours to complete in the University of Maryland's Medical Center in Baltimore, with medical experts saying it saved 57-year-old David Bennett's life. Surgeons say he's doing well 3 days after the procedure. It's estimated over 100,000 Americans are currently waiting for an organ transplant. A set of 12 stamps is going to be launched later this month to celebrate the Rolling Stones as the band marks its 60th anniversary. The stamps will feature some images from their most famous performances over the years, including their 1969 London Hyde Park show, held just 2 days after the death of founding member Brian Jones. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll have more for you as it happens. I'll be back at 3.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back to We Need to Talk About. This is GB News and I'm Alex Phillips. It's now time, of course, for my esteemed guests to unburden themselves and tell me what they need to talk about. Today, Molly has chosen to talk about Britain's plummeting birth rate. Figures show Britain is in the middle of a baby bust. In 2020, the fertility rate was 1.58 children per woman in England and Wales. In Scotland, they were even lower at 1.29. Figures which have decreased every year since 2012, which the Office for National Statistics says is a record low, making this far from just a pandemic phenomenon. It's led to growing fears that if this trend continues, it will lead to economic decline as the pool of adults of working age shrinks and the ageing population that they need to support them grows. Well, Molly, why is it that you want to talk about low birth rates?
Yeah, because, I mean, look, I think it's a sort of symptom of a problem we have in the UK, and we touched on before, that actually we're not a family-friendly country. And I think we've just come out of a really extreme period for that, obviously with a year and a half of very disruptive schooling for kids, which makes it very, very difficult for parents. But actually, you know, even before that, I think many women would look at the infrastructure or maybe the lack of infrastructure available for, you know, parents, in particular women, and obviously, you know, early years children, and just think, actually, this looks really hard and really expensive. And I think it's really sad. I mean, obviously, there's a whole economic angle, but I think for me, the issue actually is more personal, that, you know, I would say, although it's very hard work, having kids is, you know, it's the single greatest thing I've done or will ever do. And it's heartbreaking, actually, to see so many potential parents turning away from that.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think it's something you only really become alive to when you're having those conversations in your own head. And I see things through a completely different filter now. For instance, many new office blocks have these breakout zones with beanbags and basketball hoops. So 54-year-old Michael from accounts can de-stress by shooting some hoops. I mean, it's infantilizing men. Meanwhile, when men and women both want to make a very adult decision of bringing a new life into the world, it's almost as if saying, well, you're on your own. No one's out there to help you. And if you're going to do that, you have to sacrifice everything else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, there's so many different levels of this. So there's the kind of obvious stuff, the kind of the childcare and that kind of support network. You know, we lag behind in that. So the average British working parent spend 22% of their entire income on childcare. And that's about twice as much as the average European nation. So, you know, there's that whole cost thing. But then there's little things as well. And, you know, it kind of sounds funny, the example of the beanbag in the office, but it's not funny if you've been a woman. And, you know, we saw it actually, didn't we, with the whole debate about whether you can bring babies into Parliament. Like, it's very, very difficult. And my personal example of this was when I used to live near Angel. And it was just after I'd had my second kid. And we had one of those ridiculous double buggies. And I remember going to Angel Tube Station with the buggy, sort of getting on the escalator and sort of realising far too late, actually, there's no way of doing this journey with this double buggy. And in the end, you know, I realised before I was on the escalator, like, actually, this is just really, really negligent. Like, go back. But, you know, ended up getting a taxi. And actually, it sounds silly, but, you know, even getting around, we should be making it easy for parents to get around. And actually, it's really difficult. And again, if you look at some other of the European and Nordic countries, parents with under fives get free access to public transport. Like, it's a really simple but very symbolic statement, like, we're going to help families, we're going to encourage people to have kids, and that is certainly not what we do here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, joining us in this discussion as well is the Chief Executive at the Fertility Foundation, Tone Jarvis-Mack. Tone, what do you think is behind Britain's plummeting birth rate? Is it the fact that just society and culture's changed and people are saying, well, you know, the climate's in trouble and I shouldn't be having children? Is it economic reasons? Is it the fact that people are waiting much later to have families and therefore they perhaps aren't as fertile as they used to be? I mean, what's going on? Because it sounds like we're in a dire state.
There's a few factors here. I think all of the things that you actually mentioned are kind of contributing to this. As kids, they teach you in school how not to have babies, how not to get pregnant. But what they don't teach you is to think about your life after school and your future, which is women want to go and have a career, and you should have a career. And not having babies shouldn't be a stopgap for that for you. But what many women are now doing is they're waiting till later in life to have children. That's one option. Another one is they may not have found the right partner for them. So that's another reason why people aren't having children right now. And then you're seeing women that are then going it alone later on in life. So it's not just one thing. COVID has obviously been a big thing as well, because people have been stuck at home and not knowing what they should be doing and figuring out, do they really want to bring children into this world?
Yeah, do you know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because, of course, for the last 2 years, if you're a woman of a certain age and still dating, you've not been able to. If you're a woman who's actually wanting to have children and go through IVF, you've not been able to. And as we've been talking about before, it does seem to me like the world is geared up to just not help women when it comes to trying to have a job and have children. But do you think this is a conversation that we really need to involve men in as well? Because it strikes me that it takes two people to raise a child, and if people are choosing not to have children, 50% of the blame must fall on the heads of men.
Well, it doesn't always take two people, or a man and a woman, to have a child, but I know the biggest thing that people are seeing now is, one, it's, as your studio guest has mentioned, it's really expensive to raise a child. Childcare is expensive. People are worried about, are they going to have their job in 2 years' time? So it's more the conversation around, certainly with men, bringing men into the situation, into the subject, is that men generally are the sort of the byproduct. They're not really along the journey, because women drive the whole I'm having a baby or the IVF journey. But there's definitely more conversations need to be had about access to IVF treatment. There's certainly many people aren't getting the same services they are in other parts of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring Molly back into that. I mean, it's interesting that that Tone just sort of suggested that men are a byproduct. But frankly, it seems to me what we need are men who turn around and say, I want to become a father. I want to, you know, stand shoulder to shoulder with you during that whole process. And, you know, you were talking about shared parenting leave earlier. How is it, and have we got to this stage in the 21st century that having children seems very undesirable? And how do we make both men and women go, do you know what? Actually starting a family and focusing on that is something that I should prioritise.
And I mean, I think this is exactly right. I think the structure of our parental leave has a lot to answer for. And I think if we could equalise that, it would not only be good for women and, you know, men. Many fathers that I know would love to have had the chance to spend more time in those formative years. So my husband, actually, he took the first 6 weeks off because he had a sabbatical that coincided with the birth of our first daughter, and he had 6 weeks with her, which actually is not that long, but it's a lot longer than most men get. And, you know, it's time that I think I can speak for him. He would say he would just never, ever regret spending that time. And actually it's an investment, isn't it? And it's an investment in the child. And I appreciate that not every child is lucky enough to have two parents, but actually for the ones that are, why don't we make it easy? Because actually the ultimate beneficiary here is going to be the child.
Yeah, and I mean, Tone, I'm going to throw this back to you, actually. Do you think culturally we've created a situation where we're almost infantilising men? We live in this sort of throwaway, disposable society of instant gratification where why would you settle down, commit to a woman and a family when you can just keep swiping right until you're 1,000 years old? Do you think that there needs to be, role models of men coming forward and talking about fatherhood and the benefits of having a family so other men are inspired to do the same?
Traditionally, men have never really been the driving force in having children. It's always been women. And I think what's actually missing from this whole subject is that we're just talking about men and women having babies. We're talking about heterosexual couples. We're not even talking about same-sex female couples or same-sex male couples like myself that might want to have children. The amount of money it costs to start a family if you're same sex is absolutely outrageous. And access to treatment, especially for single women or for same-sex couples, there is no access to NHS-funded IVF, which is absolutely disgraceful. And I know we're dancing around this subject of men and women, and it's great. And I do think there is still a wider conversation had there. Broader speaking, the amount of people that are coming and accessing our services, which is to provide IVF grants, we're seeing more single women wanting to access treatment on their own. We're seeing more same-sex female coming through the system. And these are the ones that are being ignored and the ones that are actively wanting to have a baby and bring a child into this world. And we're not even looking at the whole childcare aspect and everything. They just want to start a family, but they're being blocked access to it through lack of funding.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting then, Molly, that Tone brought up same-sex couples as well. Do you think that, culturally the UK is just really backdated and needs to sort of pull itself together and drag itself into the 21st century?
Yes, in a word. I mean, I think it would be great to see. And I think actually whatever the family looks like, I think the key point here is we need to be more family friendly, and we're going to have to be, because actually we're not, as you said right at the beginning, Alex, like we're not going to have anyone to pay for our old age at this rate. There are not going to be enough young people, not going to be enough workers. So actually this is, it's a latent problem that we're storing up, and actually it's time.
It is so well. I couldn't agree more. Tone Jarvis-Mack, thank you so much for joining us. He, of course, is from the Fertility Foundation, and Molly Kingsley. Now, lots of you have been emailing us throughout the show today. Paddy says, and we're going back to the infamous Downing Street party number 1,683 or whatever it may be at this point. Paddy says, it's not the fact that he held the party, it's the fact that he misled and lied to Parliament about it last December. That's a very good point, Paddy. If the Prime Minister can't even be honest in Parliament, I mean, what sort of world are we living in? Julie says, just remember when the beaches at Durdle Door in Dorset were absolutely packed. These colleagues at Number 10 would be working together in small offices. I don't see what the difference is being outdoors in the garden. Well, I can sort of see your point there, but I'm sure you weren't hanging out in Durdle Door, were you? I'm sure you were following the rules, and it seems a shame that some people making them up can't seem to do the same. Steve says, Boris has demonstrated what a devious person he is, and he must go. We need a general election to refresh this so-called democracy. Strident stuff. Tracy says, why is everyone making such a big deal about outside drinks in the garden of Number 10? These people work together every day, day after day, more hours than the rest of us could stand. I see your point, but is that not a little bit with hindsight? We now know about, being outdoors. This was lockdown 1.0, remember? And a lot of the country were pretty terrified. Taylor says, while Boris was sat drinking cheese and wine, drinking cheese, that's a new one, I was having to tell vulnerable people with various conditions that they couldn't see their families. And because of their mental capacity, it meant I had to bend the truth rather than terrify them and tell them about the pandemic. It's things like that really bring this into sharp focus, isn't it? When you realise, I'm sure there are lots of you out there who lost loved ones, who didn't get to be at the birth of their new child, who didn't get to attend a funeral, who didn't get to have their final words with a relative. And yeah, it's gut-wrenching, frankly, isn't it? So yeah, we're not Boris bashing, we're bashing today, and I'm afraid Boris is the collateral damage. Now, over the last week, we've been asking, what is it that women want? Oh, yes, it's an enigma that has befuddled men since the Garden of Eden. So here on We Need to Talk About, we're going to try and find out. A wolf whistle's offensive. Is holding open the door cringe? Do we really want to split the bill? It's time for the Daily Trigger Warning. Come on then, Molly. What gets under your skin? What rattles you?
Well, I mean, I think going back to the whole parenthood issue, I think it's, being men that have absolutely no conception of what it's like to actually raise children, the amount of time that takes. And I think, again, we saw it particularly during lockdown, and I'm sure we've all got, childless friends, and respect for them, but actually I remember the biggest complaint from my childless friends being, oh, I've got so much time, so much free time, I'm so bored. And we were just like, oh my God, bored is not how I would describe this period. And actually, you go back to the Boris bashing in the parties, and actually it's, one reason I think people are so angry about that is because actually it was so difficult for people with kids. Like, it's very hard to explain what that looks like if you're not there. So.
It is a strange thing. Look, I'm your childless friend, FYI. The only character I can claim to looking after is a cat. But it does strike me that we live in this really strange age where it's almost as if there's something shameful about being a mother, that you've kind of given up agency and given up potential, and you're just doing this sort of basic, boring, domesticated task of creating a new life and bringing it up. It's kind of old-fashioned sexism, really, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And of course, it goes back, and it's really, it's a really interesting point. It goes back to the point that, of course, women parents aren't paid. So actually, our society values things according to pay, doesn't it? And that's what you're contributing. And actually, it's the age-old thing that if you're not paid for something, it's the unpaid care work, really, and it's very extreme in the case of parents.
Yeah, and I just want to say, actually, I'd give credit to the wonderful women who helped make this programme. Polly, Davina, Ellie, all mothers, all do a stellar job every day making sure we get on air with a lot of content. So, women can do both. But it is interesting. We do need to sort of change the narrative surrounding families and motherhood at this point, don't we? And sort of say to women, it's fine, it's good, it's a wonderful thing to embrace.
Yeah, I think we do. And I think, that only, it goes back actually to the last conversation. I think that will only happen actually when, men, hopefully men want to, it shouldn't be an imposition, because actually raising kids is, it's very, very hard, and you tear your hair out, but actually it is also great as well for those that want it. And actually if more men kind of stepped up, you'd have thought actually it might overall, lead to more diversity, more broad thinking. And, one of the things we've talked about a lot over the last year is this very narrow thinking in Westminster. And actually, you look at the people making decisions, and they are, by and large, men in their 50s and 60s, very...
having parties in gardens.
And, you actually think, if you could bring more diversity, whatever that looks like, and, whether that's more parents or something else, there's lots of different things that could encapsulate, but actually it wouldn't be a bad thing.
And where are you with Stella Creasy wanting to breastfeed in the Commons? Do you think that's sort of too tokenistic, or do you say, no, absolutely, it's normal, it's biological, crack on?
Yeah, I mean, personally, it's not a decision I'd made. So I brought my second kid into the office for one day and one day only. And it was a period when I had my own business, and it was a nightmare, because you're trying to do a meeting and your child is like eating something off the floor in the corner, and you're like, oh, you're doing neither job well, was what I felt. But, I do equally understand that for some women, some parents, there is a need to do that. And I think to what you were saying before, we should be flexible. We should try and have the facilities and the infrastructure to mean that actually it is easier. Although personally, I would stop at bringing kids, into a place of work. I think it's very distracting, actually, for everyone. But
Molly, thank you so much for your candor. You've been a fantastic guest today, and we'll see you again soon, no doubt. Well, that's about it for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About tomorrow, same time, same place, GB News, 2 o'clock. Coming up next, of course, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. I wonder what he's going to be talking about. Maybe a party in the garden. First of all, though, it's time for the weather forecast. See you tomorrow.
Hello again. A bright day with some sunshine across northern parts of the country. Cloudier skies in the south, grey and drizzly for southern parts of England and South Wales. Because of this weather front clearing, it's a weak feature, but it is bringing a lot of low, misty cloud. Once it clears, sunshine is to the north of it, and high pressure builds in for the rest of the week across southern parts of the country. But a keen breeze will be felt across northern Scotland, along with a few showers for the north and northwest. Meanwhile, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, much of North Wales seeing long spells of sunshine. But further south again, that's where we've got the extensive low cloud, some drizzle, perhaps even some moderate bursts of rain for East Anglia and the south east. 11 or 12 in the south, much colder further north, although feeling more pleasant, I suspect, with those sunny skies. Now, we're going to keep the keen breeze across Scotland overnight, as well as Northern Ireland. That will push in some extra cloud. Northern England seeing that cloud as well. But the cloud in the south clears, and as that clears and winds drop out, well, we'll see an extensive frost and temperatures as low as -4 or -5 Celsius in sheltered spots. Also, some fog patches, mainly around river valleys, sheltered rural parts. And they'll fairly quickly lift, I think, during the morning. Then plenty of sunshine for the southern half of the UK, a marked contrast compared to today. But cloudier skies for parts of northern England, especially the northwest, Northern Ireland and much of Scotland, along with that keen breeze. It's going to be milder actually in the north, but a bit colder further south, with temperatures closer to average here. But again, with light winds, plenty of sunshine, feeling very pleasant indeed. And that's the way things continue for the rest of the week, actually. The southern half of the UK will see sunny spells by day, but increasingly fog forming overnight, and that fog will be dense at times, perhaps continuing through the day on Friday and Saturday in places. Across Scotland and Northern Ireland, breezier and milder.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good afternoon. Welcome to the Briefing PM live from outside Downing Street on this Tuesday afternoon. I think the mood is a bit like the weather this afternoon. Miserable inside number 10 as allegations continue to swirl around parties that were held, more specifically one in the Downing Street Garden back in May 2020. Allegations that the Prime Minister and his wife were in attendance. A glum mood as well amongst Conservative MPs concerned that yet again the public opinion and mood of the country is turning against them and their governments over potential breaking of rules and regulations during the first lockdown. We'll be getting all the latest political reaction from the Conservative Party, Labour too, and from the pollsters in the next hour on what is proving to be yet again another dramatic start to the new year when it comes to politics. And we'll be getting your views too. Do get in touch. You know how to do that by now. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GB News. We're here in Downing Street for the next hour between 3 and 4. But first, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines with Rosie Wright back in the studio.
A very good afternoon. It is 1 minute past 3. I'm Rosie Wright in the GB newsroom. Let's get you up to date. The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, has accused Boris Johnson of hiding behind the civil service investigation into Downing Street parties. Well, it follows her urgent question in the House of Commons over claims that 100 staff were invited to bring your own booze to a gathering during the first national lockdown. Cabinet Minister Michael Ellis has told MPs the inquiry into allegations of lockdown parties could be paused if the Metropolitan Police decide to investigate. The Deputy Leader says the Prime Minister's absence from the Commons was telling.
It's incredibly disappointing, but not unsurprising, that the Prime Minister, of whom I asked this question, is not here today, despite not having any official engagements. And I think, Mr. Speaker, his absence speaks volumes, as does his smirks on the media. The public have already drawn their own conclusions. He can run, but he can't hide.
Well, Michael Ellis says appropriate action will be taken over the alleged party.
If wrongdoing is established, there will be requisite disciplinary action taken. As with all internal investigations, if evidence emerges of what was potentially a criminal offence, the matter would be referred to the Metropolitan Police.
Nicola Sturgeon has announced that the current COVID restrictions in Scotland will be lifted in a phased way. The First Minister told the Scottish Parliament this afternoon that the crowd limit of 500 people at large-scale outdoor events is going to be lifted from next week. Things like limits on numbers at indoor events, the requirement for table service and hospitality, and social distancing in public places, they'll all remain in place until at least January the 24th. Now, from today, asymptomatic people who test positive for COVID-19 on a lateral flow test in England, they'll no longer need to take a follow-up PCR test. They will, of course, still need to be to self-isolate and to do that immediately. The aim is to free up testing capacity for those with symptoms. Novak Djokovic's 21st Grand Slam title remains in doubt today. After it's emerged, he might have given misleading information on arrival into the country. Australian media reports that officials are concerned about claims on his entry form that he hadn't travelled in the days prior to his landing. But social media posts appear to show the world #1 attending events abroad during the period in question. Australian immigration is still considering whether to cancel Djokovic's visa. He is currently in training ahead of the Australian Open. Russia has insisted it has no intention of invading Ukraine, despite amassing 100,000 troops at the border. Russian and US officials have been holding talks in Geneva this week to try to de-escalate tensions, but there's been no sign of progress. Security expert Will Geddes told GB News there's concern on both sides.
100,000 is, I think, more of a demonstration of resilience and being robust, because there's this huge concern about NATO imposing into Ukraine the capabilities to potentially launch missiles into Russia, and equally, NATO's worried about Russia getting into Ukraine.
Doctors in the US have transplanted a pig heart into a human patient for the first time. The experimental surgery took 7 hours to complete in the University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore, with medical experts saying it saved 57-year-old David Bennett's life. Surgeons say he's doing well 3 days after the procedure. It's estimated over 100,000 Americans are currently waiting for an organ transplant. The US has condemned North Korea's ballistic missile launch, saying it violates multiple UN Security Council regulations and it poses a significant threat to its neighbours. South Korea's military says the weapon could be more advanced than a hypersonic one the country launched less than a week ago. Japan's Prime Minister described it as extremely regrettable. It follows a series of weapons tests last year as the country continues to expand its military capabilities. Now, a set of 12 new stamps is going to be launched later this month to celebrate the Rolling Stones as the band marks its 60th anniversary. The stamps are going to feature images from some of their most famous performances over the years, including their 1969 London Hyde Park show that was held just days after the death of the founding member Brian Jones. Well, the Rolling Stones are the 4th music group to feature in a dedicated set of stamps. You're up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's go back to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Welcome to the Briefing PM with me.